Everyone, my name is Joe, and in this video I'm going to walk you through a small demo of a block that Mike Bostock posted earlier this year to provide a quick visual reference to all the color palettes provided by Colorbrewer. Now, Colorbrewer was the brainchild of Cynthia Brewer, right here, and she has done extensive research on how color plays a critical role in visualization and exploratory data analysis. She also created the colorbrewer2.org website, which is a place where you can examine the various color schemes, multi-hue, single hue, as well as export them when you find one that actually suits your needs. Cynthia believes that the appropriate use of color for data display allows interrelationships and patterns within data to be easily observed. That when color is used appropriately, the organization of the perceptual dimensions of color correspond to the logical ordering of data. And these color schemes are also segmented into qualitative and quantitative, displayed here as sequential, which are very different in what insights they're trying to convey. So it's obvious that color itself plays a critical role in data visualization, which is why I chose this demo, as it not only provides insight into the inner workings of D3, but also creates the full spectrum of color palettes provided by Colorbrewer. So without any further discussion on color theory, I'd like to focus our attention on the basic principles of DOM manipulation. Now, I've gone ahead and created codepens that include the solution as well as the starter code, which is what I'm going to be using to walk you through this code along. Now, what we're looking to achieve here is this effect. I'm going to refresh it so we can actually see the full effect. I'm ultimately going to create what Mike did with a few tweaks. Instead of spans to encapsulate these colors, I'll be using divs, as well as that small transition effect. So when the colors do come in, they kind of come from left to right. So without diving any further into color theory, I'd like to focus our attention on the basic principles of DOM manipulation in D3, which, if you've used other libraries like jQuery, you're most likely familiar with. D3 specific, though, for us to grab an element, we would be using the select method. That would grab the first element of the one queried, but we could also grab all of the elements that are queried, as well as another useful method, HTML, which would allow us to inject content into that specific DOM element. Some of the helpful D3 methods that we're going to be focusing in on are d3.keys, d3.values, and d3.entries, as well as d3.descending. Okay, all of these being methods as well. And I think you'll find them most useful as the need arises to refactor data or when working specifically with associative arrays. So let's take a look at, this is the codepen. I'm going to open this up in full screen mode. And what we're looking to do here is create this kind of effect. So all I've done is really add a small transition. And lately I've been working with transitions, so I just thought it would be a nice cool effect to apply some transitions here and also introduce you as well to transitions. I've created both starter and solution code, and those links have been provided in the details. So let's get started. Let's just jump right in. Before we actually get into the code, let's take a look at the HTML. So in the HTML, what I've gone ahead and done is first created a link to D3 as well as Colorbrewer. So we're going to need those two. Those two are essential here. I've also added a CSS link here for Colorbrewer because you can get the palettes created as CSS. So it's easy to add those elements or assign classes to your HTML elements to give the desired color effect versus doing it through D3. Let's go into here, and as part of the CSS, I've added some CSS here, and we are going to go back and refactor this to make it look prettier through the CSS. We don't necessarily need it to actually display the colors, so we're gonna jump right in here. We're going to first create a color variable that is going to attach to Colorbrewer. Now, since we imported the Colorbrewer library, it also provides us this Colorbrewer object, and we're going to take a further look at that object in the console. So we're going to open up the console. I'm going to save this. Let's see if we can jump into the console right here. Okay, saved. Let's refresh this. Maybe we're going to refresh this, and we should be jumping right into the debugger. Great. All right. So we're here. So if we take a look at, slow here, color, right? Color now contains this object, and this particular object has all of the colors, all of the palettes, along with their corresponding color schemes. So most of them have at least a minimum of 3 colors, possibly all the way to maximum of 10. This specific one has 8 colors here for this particular palette. So this is what we're working with, and what you can see is that this is an associative array. So we have this object with what would be the key and then its value, which is another object, which we just took a look at, which is another kind of associative array, 3 being the key and array being the value. So I'm going to introduce you to that first D3 method, D3 keys. Now D3 keys, the way we're using it here is going to be identical to how it's referenced later on in a different context, but I think it's important that you see it in action here so you can tie the two together. When you actually see it coded, you know what it's doing. So let's take color and see if we can grab all of the colors. So there we have it. So we know we can grab the colors using D3.keys. And we can see all of the color schemes here, as well as the next one is D3.values. Okay, and that's going to grab the values, which were stored in objects. Okay, so we could definitely see those colors there. So those are 2 pretty useful D3 methods. Say you didn't have D3 keys, the other way that you could have got all of the colors, right? Or var, let's do key in color, or console log key, right? All right. So if we do that, we would see all of the color names. So that's another way to do it. Now, we're just outputting it here. D3.keys, as we saw, puts it into an array, which is important because D3 passes the data down the pipeline as arrays. So it's important that the data that we use is stored in an array. Okay, great. So let's get out of the debugger. Let's close this. So now we know what we're working with. So I'm going to get rid of the debugger. All right. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and create a variable to store our DOM elements that we want to create. So we're going to use d3.select. We're going to select the body element, and then we're going to select all palettes. Now, palettes don't exist as of yet, but this select all allows us to create placeholders for the data or bind data to any palettes that did exist. If they don't exist, then we'll create new items for that. And then we're going to bind that using the data method. And here we're going to feed it or convert our data on the fly using d3.entries, and we're going to give it color. Great. So let's take a look back in our debugger and see what's going on here. Okay. So D3, select all. Great. I'm going to refresh this. Let's go into the debugger real quick. All right. So we saw before how D3.keys gets us all of the keys. D3.values gets us all of the values. What we can do is convert our data into a method where we can actually reference key and value as property names within our objects. And that's using D3.entries. So if we do that, we have this object now that has a key and a value. So now as we pass the data down the pipeline, all we have to do is reference D.key or D.value, and it will return these objects as requested. Great. Let's go back in here. I will get rid of the debugger. We don't need that right now. Okay. Now that we've created a placeholder for these items, we actually want to tell D3 or instruct it to enter and start doing something with it. So we use the .enter method to indicate that. And we're also going to use .append to append those elements. Now, I'm not creating palettes, I'm creating spans. And for those spans, I'm going to assign them a class of palette, which we then will define in CSS, as well as a title. And the title is going to be visible when we hover over the object. And for this, now the data is being passed down one at a time, and via this callback, we can actually access the data using D.key. All right, so what is that doing for us? Well, let's take a look. So I'm saying that the objects are being passed down the pipeline. So I'm going to do console.log, and let's log D.key as well as I for the index of the item. Let's take a look at what that returns. All right, so when we do that, we see that we get the name of the object because it's D.key, and we saw earlier that D.key references the name of the palette as well as its index within the array. All right, so the index as of right now isn't doing much for us. We don't really need it, but we definitely need the D.key. All right, so let's close that. We don't need this anymore, and we'll just make the code look nice, like nice code. Okay, we're also going to add an on click event. Okay, what this requires is also another callback. So anytime we want to start working or using the data, we need to reference this callback. And for this, I'm going to console log. Now, I want to see all of the colors themselves displayed in a console log. So if I actually go up here and console log this, let's see what happens when I click on this. This is the effect that I'm looking for. I want to take all of the swatches and store their color values on individual lines displayed in a console log. So this is the effect that we're looking to achieve. Let's go back here and see if we can't figure out how to do that. So I'm going to console log, and in our console log, let's take a look. What we're going to do is we want to get the values, so I'm going to use d3.values because we want to get the values. And what are we going to get? d.value, right? So let's say if we console log that, and I go up to the box. Now, I've gone ahead already and taken a moment to add the CSS for palette. I've commented out opacity so we can actually see the object, but I wanted to see it. So I put it in there for now so that we can actually see these objects as we're going forward. I'm going to click on the object, and we see that it executes this click event and that we have the array. Right? So we already know what it looks like, but that's not the display that I want to see. So I am going to use another D3 method called map. And map is kind of like a for each loop. It's going to loop through each object, and we are going to convert that into a JSON object. So let's go here. If we save it, we see that we're getting closer to what we're trying to achieve. So it's outputting it all kind of one after the other, not what we want to see, so we need to do an additional format. And what we're going to do is join that using a new line. All right, and if we do, voila. So we're able to achieve that effect of displaying it using this on event. Great. Now we're going to add our swatches of colors to the palettes, and we're going to create a new swatch variable, and we're going to attach it to the palette object that we're passing down the pipeline. We're going to select all of the swatches, which are pretty much placeholders right now, and then we're going to give it some data. Now what we have to be aware of is the data here needs to be referenced using the anonymous function because it's being passed down the pipeline. So we're not adding sort of new data, we're reusing the pre-existing data in the pipeline. So I'm going to give it an anonymous function, and then we're going to return d.value. We are going to be working with d.value, but at the same time, we are going to be manipulating a bit. So let's do this. Let's console log d.value and see what we get. All right. So with d.value, we can see we get the associative array with all of the items within it. If we wanted to reference one of those objects, we need to do it based on its key name. So I could do 3 here, and we should see all of the objects that have 3. And if I did 9, we would see all the objects that have 9 in them. And what you can see is some of them don't. So what this is indicating to us is that some of those palettes contain color swatches that have 3, others contain some that have 9, but some of them don't have 9. Okay, and I believe we can go all the way up to 12, and then we should see some with 12, but now we're seeing more of the undefined. So what we want to do is grab a numerical value here, or the key name, in order for us to find the appropriate swatch. But we want to grab the one that contains the most values in any one of those palettes. So in order to do that, we're going to use d3.keys to grab d.value. Right? So once we have that, we know we have all of the keys within the value, but we need only one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to map it, I'm going to convert it into a number, and then I am going to sort it and use another D3 method called D3.descending, and then I'm going to choose the first object. So what D3.descending is it sorts it in reverse order. So instead of 3 being the first number, whatever was the last number, whether it was 9, 10, 11, 12, that's the first. And by referencing 0 now, because keys creates a new array. And in creating an array, we now reference the index number and not the key name. So now that we have it, so we can take that logic and apply it over here, right? d3.keys, d.value. We want to do a map. This is number. We want to sort d3.descending, and then we're going to choose that first item. Great. So we have it. So I'm going to console log this so we don't bombard our logs. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do here is I'm going to get rid of this guy right here. And we are going to enter. Okay, so by entering, we are now telling D3, just like we did up here. We entered, and we said, now we want to work with the data. Well, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to enter here. I'm not going to put that there. I'm going to put that right here. All right, we're going to enter. We're also going to, now that we entered, we need to append the swatches, right? Well, we're not going to actually append swatches. We're going to append divs. Just like we did before. When we did the palette, we added or selected all the palettes, but we wound up appending spans. Okay, here we are going to select all swatches, and then we're going to append a div. All right. I'm also going to give it a class. And that class is going to be swatch. And what we want to do, what I like to do, is to output the actual color hex code. So once again, because the data is being passed down the pipeline, I need to use this callback function, and I'm going to return D. All right. So by returning D, we now start to see our color palette being created. So I'm starting to see a bunch of colors here, right? Okay. That's what we were looking for. I'm also going to now add the actual background color, and that's, instead of an attribute, we're going to use the style method. And here we're going to use background color, and we're going to give it a function, because once again, we are looking to return the actual value, and here we're going to return D. Right, so we're trying to return D, but we don't see anything, and that's because we're actually not returning D. So once we return D, we see it. I also notice that these colors are off in the number of colors that should be displayed, and I can see that's a result of me misspelling descending. Great, so now that we have it. So that's our basic design. If we look at the final design, that's exactly what we're looking to achieve. There is one more thing that I wanted to demo, and that is to add a transition. So I am going to select all of our palettes, right? Because they do exist now, and they have a class, so I'm referencing it using dot palette to grab all the objects. And then I'm going to add a transition, right? Okay, so I'm calling transition, and then I'm also going to call a duration. So how long do I want it to take? So how about, I don't know, 500 milliseconds. Now, we need to transition from and to something. So if I go into our palette here, I could see that opacity was turned off earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make everything opaque, and you can actually see that it's transitioning out, and that's because there's this transition property call here, which I'm saying transition when we go from one transition to another, specifically for opacity, take 5 seconds to do so. I'm going to add a delay. Okay, and that delay is going to be based off of calculation on the index value. So first I'm going to console.log I and see what we got. Okay, so I is console log the index value. Now that value is way too large to do the transition, so I'm going to divide it by 100. So we can get a much smaller value here. So there we go. We got a much smaller value, and I'm going to take that even further and times it by 10,000 so we can bring that value up into the seconds. So great. So now we're into the seconds. Last thing we need to do is define what is the attribute or style that we will be changing, and that's opacity. We're going to change opacity to 1. So if we do that, save our work, and say now what we need to do here is instead of console logging, we need to actually return. So nothing was happening because we were trying to console log something. So now we start to see it. So if I open this up, save this, open it up in full paint mode, get rid of this, we don't need that anymore, and I just noticed a quick error message on the bottom. So let's go back here and see if I can fix that small error message that we just saw. And here is going to be return right here. So I got to get rid of that. All right. So now we should see the transition, a nice transition using this. Now I also had up here earlier had included this transition, but we don't need this transition anymore because D3 is going to be responsible for our transition. So if I save this and I open this up into full page mode, let's take a look. So there we go. So it's a nice transition. It's a little faster than the previous one because the CSS transition was overriding. So now it happens a little faster. So you can actually see how you can control transitions via CSS, or we can use D3 to create those transitions. So thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you in the next video.